Friday night at the local bowling alley should have been all strikes, laughter, and the clatter of pins. But by sunrise, it turned into one of the most chilling crime scenes in small-town America. What really happened that night behind those neon lights? Hello everyone. Welcome to the Serial Crime Chronicles for newcomers to this channel. If you love true stories, this channel was made for you. We post true crime stories they thought they buried every day. If this interests you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you always get the latest content. Your support means a lot. Don't forget to hit the like button. As I've told you before, the like button is a simple gesture for you, but for me it's something huge because it helps YouTube know that people like my content and shows it to more new people. So please don't forget to support me by hitting that like button. In this true crime series, we'll dive into the shocking case known as the bowling alley murders, a crime that shattered a community, baffled investigators, and left behind more questions than answers. We'll walk through the events leading up to the tragedy, the red flags that were ignored, the painstaking investigation, the suspects, and the emotional trial that followed. By the end, you'll see how one night at a family-friendly bowling alley spiraled into a true crime nightmare. It was the spring of 2003 in Wichita, Kansas. At the edge of town stood a retro-style bowling alley called Sunset Lanes, a place that had been around since the 1960s. For decades, it had been more than just a business. It was a hub of the community. Families bowled on weekends, teenagers hung out in the arcade, and lead players showed up every Thursday night. The Friday in question, April 25, 2003, was no different. Music played over the speakers, the smell of nachos and popcorn filled the air, and the sound of rolling balls echoed through the lanes. That night, a handful of people stood out. Darla James, 42, the general manager, a hard-working single mom, known for treating her employees like family. Oh, Eric and Shonda Miller, a young couple in their 20s who bowled there every Friday. Justin Reynolds, 17, the newest employee, working his second week behind the shoe counter. And several late-night regulars, including a man later identified as a suspect. But at this point, just another face in the crowd. The circumstances were ordinary, almost comforting. But behind the hum of neon lights, something sinister was about to unfold. Sunset Lane stayed open until 1 a.m. on weekends, and closing shifts were often quiet after midnight. That night, Darla had noticed something odd. A man in his late 30s sitting alone at the far end of the bar. He hadn't bowled a single frame, hadn't ordered more than one beer, and just lingered. One of the waitresses mentioned that he seemed to be watching people more than anything else. Darla brushed it off at first. After all, plenty of people came in to watch friends bowl. But there was something about the way his eyes followed the young couple, Eric and Shonda, that unsettled her. By 12:30 a.m., most of the crowd had cleared out. Only Darla, Justin the teenager, and the lingering couple were still inside, preparing to leave. That's when things took a turn. Around 12:45 a.m., the stranger stood up from the bar. He paid for his drink. But instead of heading for the exit, he walked toward the counter where Justin was sorting bowling shoes. He asked the boy a question about lane rentals, odd, since the place was about to close. Justin recalled later that the man's tone was flat, almost rehearsed. Then, without warning, he pulled a handgun from his jacket. Darla froze. Eric instinctively tried to shield Shonda. The man ordered everyone to the back office, his voice low but commanding. This wasn't a robbery in progress. It was something darker. Inside the office, the man demanded cash from the safe. Darla complied, handing over the small weekend deposit. But when he looked at the terrified faces in front of him, it became clear the money wasn't the only thing he wanted. What happened inside that office over the next 20 minutes would later be described as a nightmare stitched into reality. When police arrived hours later, they found a scene so brutal it would haunt Wichita for years to come. But who was the man behind the gun? And why did a bowling alley, of all places, become his target? That's where the investigation begins. By sunrise, Sunset Lanes had transformed from a place of laughter into a scene of horror. 4 people had been trapped in the back office. 3 would never walk out alive. And 1 terrified teenager became the only living witness. It was just after 7 a.m. on Saturday morning when Wichita police received a frantic 911 call. A cleaning crew had arrived to prep the lanes for the weekend rush and stumbled upon the unimaginable. 3 bodies in the office and a 4th person, barely alive, bleeding on the floor. The victims were quickly identified. Darla James, the manager, shot once in the chest. Oh, Eric and Shonda Miller, the young couple who never made it home that night. Both shot execution style. Oh, and Justin Reynolds, the 17-year-old employee. Miraculously, he had survived a gunshot wound to the shoulder. Weak and in shock, he was rushed to the hospital. The bowling alley, once filled with neon lights and retro decor, was now cordoned off with yellow tape. Officers describe it as eerily silent, except for the faint hum of the vending machines. From the beginning, detectives faced several pressing questions. A robbery gone wrong? The safe had been emptied, but less than $2,000 was missing, hardly enough to justify such a massacre. Targeted attack? Had the shooter come for someone specific? Darla? The couple? A thrill kill? The shooter hadn't worn a mask, suggesting either recklessness or confidence. Captain Mark Helton, the lead investigator, called it the kind of crime that makes no sense at first glance. To keep up with this series and even more interesting true crime stories that never came to light until now, hit the red subscribe button. Now back to the story. The breakthrough came from Justin Reynolds, the teen survivor. After emergency surgery, detectives were able to speak with him the next day. Shaking, voice breaking, Justin recounted what happened in the office. The man ordered them to lie on the ground. He demanded the money, but didn't leave afterward. He paced, muttering to himself, almost like he was debating something. Then, suddenly, he raised a gun and started firing. Justin had been hit first, but by some miracle, he had rolled under a desk, pretending to be dead. That decision saved his life. When asked if he could identify the shooter, Justin nodded. He remembered the man clearly. Late 30s, about 6 feet tall, scruffy beard, wearing a faded baseball cap. Most importantly, he recalled the man's eyes. They were cold, like he wasn't even there, Justin said. Armed with a description, detectives began combing through possible suspects. They looked at former employees, anyone recently fired who might hold a grudge. Local troublemakers, men with violent records who hung around the area. Transient drifters. Wichita had seen its share of highway drifters who passed through town. One name quickly surfaced. Raymond Ray Doyle, a 38-year-old ex-con recently released from prison for armed robbery. Doyle had a history of hanging out in bars near Sunset Lanes and matched Justin's description almost perfectly. Meanwhile, Wichita was reeling. Sunset Lanes wasn't just a business. It was woven into the fabric of the community. Parents told their kids not to go out after dark. Bowling leagues canceled their seasons. For the first time in years, people locked their doors early and double-checked their windows. The murders became front-page news. The Wichita Eagle ran the headline, "Bloodshed at the Bowling Alley." TV anchors describe it as senseless violence in the heart of America. For the Miller families, the loss was unbearable. Eric's mother later said, "They went out for a night of fun, and they never came home." How do you explain that to anyone? Investigators soon got their hands on surveillance footage from inside the alley. While the cameras didn't cover the back office, they did capture the man sitting alone at a bar, just as Darla had noticed. The grainy video showed him nursing a beer, watching the lanes. He left the bar, disappeared from camera view, and never came back out. That was enough to prove Justin's story true. Detectives released still images of the suspect to the public. Tips began to pour in. Among the callers was a bartender from a dive 2 miles away. She swore she recognized the man as Raymond Doyle. "Same hat, same eyes," she told police. Detectives now had their prime suspect. They just needed to find him. But Doyle had vanished. No one had seen him since the night of the murders. His parole officer hadn't heard from him. His rundown apartment was abandoned, clothes still inside. It was as if he disappeared into thin air. To keep up with this series and even more interesting true crime stories that never came to light until now, hit the red subscribe button. Now back to the story. Was Doyle truly the man behind the bowling alley murders? Or was someone else lurking in the shadows? As investigators dug deeper, they discovered unsettling details, connections between Doyle, the bowling alley, and one of the victims that raised more questions than answers. And in the midst of it all, whispers of another possibility began to surface. What if this crime wasn't random at all, but a message? Police had their suspect, an ex-con named Raymond Doyle. But the closer they looked, the more the story twisted. Was Doyle really the man behind the bowling alley massacre, or just an easy scapegoat? Raymond Doyle wasn't a stranger to Wichita PD. His rap sheet stretched back 2 decades. Burglary, assault, and an armed robbery that landed him behind bars for nearly 10 years. He'd been released only 6 months before the murders. At first glance, he fit the description perfectly. Scruffy, tall, late 30s. He'd been spotted at bars near Sunset Lanes, and the bartender swore she saw him the night of the murders. But something didn't add up. Doyle had no known connection to Darla, the Millers, or Justin. Why would he target a bowling alley? Detectives dug deeper and discovered something chilling. Doyle and Darla, the manager, had crossed paths years earlier. Darla had once worked part-time at a diner, the same diner Doyle had tried to rob in the 1990s. Could he have held a grudge all these years? Or was it just coincidence? The theory split the team. Some believed it was motive enough. Others argued it was too thin to explain the brutality. As Wichita police searched for Doyle, tips came in from across Kansas. Sightings at a truck stop, a man resembling Doyle seen at a Greyhound station. Each lead fizzled out. Then, a week later, investigators found Doyle's old Ford pickup abandoned in a wooded area outside of town. Inside, fast food wrappers, cigarette butts, and a half-empty bottle of whiskey. But no Doyle. The vehicle intensified the fear-gripping Wichita. People whispered, was Doyle hiding in plain sight? Or had someone else used his truck to frame him? Meanwhile, Justin Reynolds, the teenage survivor, began to question his own memory. In his initial statement, he swore Doyle looked exactly like the shooter. But after being shown mugshots, he hesitated. The eyes were the same, but the voice? I don't know anymore. This doubt shook the case. If the only living witness wasn't certain, prosecutors couldn't rely solely on his testimony. Detectives soon uncovered a second potential lead. Michael Carr, a 29-year-old former Sunset Lanes employee who'd been fired by Darla just 2 months earlier for stealing from the till. Carr had a volatile temper and had threatened Darla in the past. Witnesses recalled him saying, "She'll regret messing with me." Unlike Doyle, Carr knew the layout of the bowling alley, including the cameras and the back office. But Carr had an alibi. He claimed he'd been at a house party the night of the murders. Several friends backed him up. Still, detectives couldn't shake the feeling something was off. The real turning point came from the crime scene. Forensic analysts lifted a partial fingerprint from the office desk, the same desk Justin had rolled under when he played dead. At first, the print didn't match anyone in the system. But weeks later, it came back with a hit, Michael Carr. This discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. Carr had lied. His alibi was crumbling. The community, already shaken, now felt betrayed. Doyle had been the monster in their minds. But now, suspicion shifted to someone who had once served them beer and shoes at the alley. For the Miller family, the new development reopened wounds. Eric's sister told reporters, "We thought this nightmare was almost over. Now we don't know what to believe." Detective brought Carr in for questioning. At first, he denied everything. But when confronted with a fingerprint, his story began to unravel. He admitted being at the bowling alley that night, but claimed he only went to scare Darla, not kill anyone. According to Carr, things got out of control when Doyle, yes, Doyle again, showed up. Carr insisted Doyle pulled the trigger, while he just watched in shock. It was a wild story, one that painted Carr as an unwilling accomplice. But was it true, or a desperate attempt to shift blame? To keep up with this series and even more interesting true crime stories that never came to light until now, hit the red subscribe button. Now back to the story. With 2 suspects pointing fingers at each other, one missing, one cornered, the investigation spiraled into chaos. Who really pulled the trigger at Sunset Lanes? Was it the drifter ex-con Doyle, the bitter former employee Carr? Oh, could it have been both? The answers would come, but not before the case took yet another dark and unexpected turn. The fingerprint said one thing, the survivor's memory said another, and the suspect, he had a story that twisted everything upside down. In Wichita, The question was no longer just who pulled the trigger, but whether justice could even be found. Inside a windowless room at the Wichita Police Department, Michael Carr sat across from detectives. His hands fidgeted, his eyes darted, his story shifting with every question. Yes, he admitted, he had been at Sunset Lanes that night. But according to him, he wasn't the gunman. I just wanted to talk to Dollar. That's it. Doyle. Doyle's the one who lost it. Detectives pressed him. Why was his fingerprint on the office desk? Why hadn't he told anyone he was there? Why had his alibi turned out to be a lie? Carr's answer. He panicked. He knew his past would make him look guilty, so he lied. But he swore he never pulled the trigger. Investigators weren't convinced. They began piecing together Carr's history, and what they found painted a disturbing picture. A financial ruin. Carr was drowning in debt, recently evicted from his apartment. A violent temper, ex-girlfriend described him as controlling and prone to outbursts. A resentment toward Dollar. After being fired, Carr told at least 2 friends that Dollar deserved to pay. The picture emerging was less of an unlucky bystander, and more of a man with motive. Where was Doyle? But then came the problem. Raymond Doyle. Despite weeks of searching, Doyle remained missing. No credit card use. No sightings confirmed. It was like he had vanished from the earth. Some investigators began to wonder aloud, was Doyle a convenient phantom? Someone Carr invoked to muddy the waters? Others weren't so sure. The bartender's ID, the pickup truck, the matching description from Justin, all pointed to Doyle being very real. And if Doyle was real, where was he hiding? For 17-year-old Justin Reynolds, the weight of the investigation was crushing. Detectives asked him again and again, was Carr the man he saw that night? Justin hesitated. His initial statement described Doyle, the beard, the cap, the cold eyes. Carr looked different, cleaner cut, no beard. But trauma has a way of blurring memory. Could his mind have filled in the gaps? Could Carr have been the shooter all along? In a lineup, Justin paused so long the room went silent. Finally, he whispered, "It could be him, but I don't know." That hesitation threatened to unravel the entire case. Still, science began to close in on Carr. Ballistics tests linked the shell casings from Sunset Lanes to a handgun Carr had once owned, a weapon now missing. Friends told police Carr had sold it to a buddy months before the murders. That buddy was never found. Gunpowder residue was also discovered on one of Carr's jackets seized from his home. The evidence was stacking against him. By late summer 2003, the district attorney's office prepared to charge Carr with 3 counts of capital murder. But there was hesitation. Without Doyle in custody, the defense could easily argue Carr was just a scapegoat, and the real killer was still at large. The DA faced a choice: risk going to trial without Doyle, or wait and hope he surfaced. As the pressure mounted, Carr made a bold move. Through his lawyer, he told prosecutors he was willing to testify, but not in his own defense. He claimed he could help them. According to Carr, Doyle had threatened him weeks before the murders. Doyle wanted inside information about Sunset Lanes, where the cameras were, what time the safe was opened, who worked the late shifts. Carr admitted giving him that information in exchange for cash. But when Doyle carried out the crime, Carr insisted he wanted no part of it. "He used me, and now you're trying to pin it all on me," Carr shouted during one interrogation. Wichita was divided. Some believed Carr's story, that Doyle, the ghostly ex-con, had orchestrated the whole thing. Others were convinced Carr was lying, using a missing man as a shield. The Miller family grew frustrated. Eric's father told reporters, "We don't care about the finger-pointing. We just want the truth. Who killed our kids? Who killed Dollar? That's what matters." In the end, prosecutors made their choice. On October 2nd, 2003, Michael Carr was formally charged with 3 counts of capital murder and 1 count of attempted murder. The case against him would hinge on the fingerprint, the forensic evidence, and his own inconsistent statements. But the defense was ready. Their argument was simple. The survivor never confirmed Carr. Doyle was still out there. And without Doyle in custody, how could they prove Carr pulled the trigger? It was shaping up to be one of the most contentious trials Wichita had ever seen. As the trial date approached, both sides prepared for battle. The prosecution built their narrative. Carr was a bitter ex-employee who came back for revenge. The defense countered with their shadow story. Doyle, the missing ex-con, was a true monster behind the massacre. And when the courtroom doors opened, no one was prepared for the emotional testimony, shocking twists, and haunting confessions that would follow. The city of Wichita packed into the courthouse. On one side, grieving families desperate for justice. On the other, a former bowling alley worker fighting for his life. But as testimony unfolded, a shocking twist would blur the line between guilt and mystery. The trial of Michael Carr began in January 2004. From day one, the courthouse overflowed. Reporters lined the steps. Victims' families filled the benches, clutching tissues. The stakes were clear. 3 counts of capital murder. If convicted, Carr would never see freedom again. The prosecution painted a straightforward picture. Carr, bitter over losing his job, stormed into Sunset Lanes, executed Darla James and the Millers, and nearly killed Justin Reynolds. Their motive, revenge mixed with desperation. The defense countered with one word, Doyle. Their narrative was that Raymond Doyle, the missing ex-con, was a true killer. Carr, they claimed, was guilty only of stupidity, not murder. The most anticipated moment came when Justin Reynolds, the 17-year-old survivor, took the stand. The courtroom went silent as he described the events of that night. His voice shook as he recounted lying on the floor, pretending to be dead, listening to his friends take their last breaths. When asked if the shooter was Michael Carr, Justin hesitated. His hands trembled. His eyes welled with tears. I can't say for sure. The eyes, they were cold, like Doyle's picture. But I don't know anymore. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The prosecution winced. The defense seized on it. To keep up with this series and even more interesting true crime stories that never came to light until now, hit the red subscribe button. Now back to the story. Next came the science. A fingerprint from the office desk matched Carr. Gunpowder residue was found on his jacket. Shell casings linked to a handgun Carr once owned. The prosecution argued the evidence was undeniable. The defense countered that Carr admitted being in the alley. Of course, his fingerprint would be there. As for the jacket, the defense claimed residue could have come from casual handling, not firing. The battle over forensics became a war of experts. Each side tried to dismantle the other's credibility. Emotional testimony came from the families of the victims. Eric Miller's mother sobbed as she described the knock on her door at 3 a.m. Shonda's sister spoke of the wedding Shonda had been planning. And Darla's teenage daughter read a letter she'd written. My mom wasn't supposed to die at work. She wasn't supposed to die because someone was angry. She was supposed to come home. Jurors wiped tears. Even Carr, for the first time, lowered his head and cried. Carr himself chose not to testify. But his lawyers hammered one point, reasonable doubt. They replayed Justin's uncertainty, the missing Doyle, the lack of DNA evidence directly tying Carr to the trigger. They painted Carr as a flawed man, a liar maybe, but not a killer. You cannot convict a man on maybes and shadows, the defense attorney thundered. Raymond Doyle is a monster in this story, and is still out there. Just when it seemed the case was leaning toward doubt, the prosecution dropped a bombshell, a jailhouse informant. The inmate, serving time for burglary, testified that Carr confessed in detail while behind bars. According to the informant, Carr said, I pulled the trigger, but Doyle made me do it. He said Darla had to go. He said if I didn't do it, he'd kill me. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, objections. The defense immediately attacked the testimony, calling the informant unreliable, a man willing to say anything for a lighter sentence. But the damage was done. The trial's final day was electric. The prosecution told jurors, Michael Carr's fingerprint is on that desk. His gun fired those bullets. His motive was revenge. Don't let him hide behind a ghost. The defense countered. This is a case built on shadows and shaky witnesses. A missing man, Doyle, fits a survivor's memory. Carr lied, yes, but lies don't equal murder. Don't convict on doubt. Jurors deliberated for 3 full days. Families sat in the hallway, praying. Reporters speculated on TV. Wichita held its breath. On the 3rd afternoon, the buzz of cell phones spread. Verdict reached. As the jury filed back into the courtroom, silence fell. The foreman stood, paper trembling in his hands. The verdict would decide Michael Carr's fate. But even with a conviction, the haunting shadow of Raymond Doyle would never fade. By 2006, nearly 2 decades after the terror at the Las Cruces bowling alley, there were more questions than answers. Despite multiple sketches, re-release crime scene reports, and a few promising suspects over the years, no one was ever convicted. The 2 gunmen who tied up 7 people, shot them execution style, and walked away with little more than a handful of cash, vanished into thin air. For the families, the lack of justice was its own prison. To keep up with this series and even more interesting true crime stories that never came to light until now, hit the red subscribe button. Now back to the story. For Melissa Repass, the little girl who survived after being shot 5 times, survival was both a blessing and a burden. She lived her life with physical scars, but it was the emotional weight that stayed with her. Interviews years later revealed a determination not to let fear control her, but she also admitted the trauma never fully left. Other surviving victims and families of the deceased carried similar burdens. Some left Las Cruces altogether, unable to pass by the bowling alley without reliving that day. Others stayed, determined to keep the memory of their loved ones alive. The bowling alley itself eventually closed. The building later converted into different businesses. But for locals, the site was always a shadowed landmark. Why no arrests? The big question still hangs. How did 2 men commit such a bold crime in broad daylight and get away with it? Some theories suggest cartel involvement. Las Cruces sits near the US-Mexico border, and in 1990, drug routes and cartel activity were rampant. The sheer brutality of the shootings, paired with the fact that the robbers left behind money, suggested to some investigators this was no ordinary robbery. Others believe it may have been a hit disguised as a robbery, that at least one of the victims was targeted, and the others were silenced to eliminate witnesses. And then there are those who think it was simply 2 men who panicked, pulled the trigger, and then disappeared, aided by the lack of surveillance technology at the time. The case remains open, officially classified as one of New Mexico's most infamous unsolved crimes. The FBI continues to keep the sketches on file, periodically re-releasing them to the public. Advances in DNA testing and forensic technology could, in theory, bring new life to the case, if any viable evidence is ever found. But with each passing year, the likelihood dims. The gunmen, if alive today, would be older men, possibly hiding in plain sight, possibly already dead. Every February, locals in Las Cruces remember the victims. Community members hold vigils, survivors share their stories, and people reflect on how the crime shaped the town. The case has become a dark piece of local history, passed down to younger generations as a cautionary tale about evil that can strike anywhere, even in the most ordinary places. Parents who once let their kids roam free at the bowling alley now speak of vigilance, of never assuming safety. The tragedy carved into the community's psyche remains, decades later. So what do we have in the end? Oh, a bowling alley turned crime scene. 7 lives shattered. A case that left even veteran investigators haunted. And 2 faceless killers who walked away, their identities still unknown. True crime is often about answers, but sometimes the weight lies in the absence of them. And that's where you come in. What do you think happened that morning in Las Cruces? Was it a cartel hit? A robbery gone wrong? Or something even darker, buried beneath the surface? Do you believe the killers are still alive, blending into society, or that they died years ago, carrying their secret to the grave? Drop your theories in the comments below. I'll be reading them all. Because sometimes the truth isn't found in case files. Sometimes it comes from connecting dots, from sharing perspectives, and from never letting a case go cold in our collective memory. The Las Cruces Bowling Alley Massacre stands as one of the most chilling unsolved mass shootings in U.S. history. A reminder that evil doesn't always wear a mask, and sometimes it walks right past us in broad daylight. If you found this story as haunting as I did, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive into America's darkest unsolved cases. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, justice is only possible if we refuse to forget.